Left alone in the bathroom, Stella put on a cotton thong, purple silk shorts, and a matching silk tank top. She collected her dress, bra, and underwear from the floor, then looked in the mirror. Taking a deep breath, hoping it would calm her rapidly beating heart, she looked at her reflection again. It seemed to her that she did not recognize the woman in the mirror. The woman who looked at her was a cheater who hid in the bathroom while her unsuspecting husband lay in bed. She was afraid to leave the bathroom because she knew what awaited her. David, her husband, will want to have sex. They had been married less than 2 weeks, and she had already refused him 2 evenings, citing a headache. And that's not counting the fact that 3 nights ago she returned home late, when he was already asleep. It was the night she slept with Trent, the ex she realized she had never forgotten. She told David that she was spending the evening with her friends. The guilt of sleeping with Trent weighed heavily on her. David's eyes seemed to see right through her, unraveling her lies and getting to the heart of what she had done. It seemed to her that every word she uttered and every movement she made betrayed her subconscious signals that she gave out of shame for cheating on her husband, to whom she had been married for only 2 weeks. David was not a bad person. He treated her well. His face was still attractive, despite the deep lines on his forehead and around his eyes, and his hair, more gray than black, gave him an imposing appearance, and he took care of her financial needs at the time she needed help, and even after that. After years of shortages and constant worries about money, David provided her with stability and security. A house, a car, clothes, everything she needed, he provided. Except for one thing. Stella had no passion for David. Not like with Trent, when everything was fine between them. In fact, it wasn't even close to the same. David was more than 20 years older than her. He had gotten a little out of shape physically as he approached 50, so he didn't excite her in that regard. The age difference also meant that they had different interests, and topics of conversation quickly dried up. And he didn't want any more children. He already had a family with his ex-wife. For too long, Stella lived in a fog, ignoring the negative aspects of her relationship with David because he gave her the opportunity to remain indifferent. Everything changed 3 nights ago. Her meeting with Trent woke her up, clearing her thoughts. With new clarity, Stella faced a dilemma. Should she choose a life of stability with a man to whom she swore an oath of fidelity just a few days ago, or give it all up and take a chance on the chance to get back what she had with Trent? "Stella, are you going to bed?" She heard David's voice from the bedroom, which brought her out of her thoughts. "Yes, I'll come out now," she shouted back. She took one last look in the mirror, sighed, and left the bathroom. She saw that David was lying in bed, resting his head on his elbow and watching her. Although he was almost completely covered by the blanket, she could tell from his bare arms and shoulders that he was shirtless. There was a look in his eyes that she recognized. Wish. She silently threw her clothes into the laundry basket, turned off the light, and climbed into bed. She immediately turned on her side, facing away from David. She hoped he would take this as a sign that she was not in the mood. She saw the wall in front of her light up softly, guessing that David had turned on the lamp on his nightstand. He didn't seem to get the hint. She felt his hand on her thigh, then his hand slid to her stomach, then under the waistband of her shorts and underwear. She felt a lump in her throat as the guilt of meeting Trent washed over her again. "I'm a little tired," she complained quietly, hoping that would be enough to make him back down. "Oh, come on, Stella," he replied irritably. "We haven't had sex for 3 nights. Please, I'll be quick." The shame of sleeping with Trent came flooding back, and she convinced herself that she owed David what he wanted. After all, she married him. Besides, what newlywed woman would refuse sex with her husband, she asked herself. Okay, she gave in. He will get what he wants, and her feelings of guilt will temporarily subside. As if reading her thoughts, David said, "I drank a lot today on purpose to dull my sensitivity." And then he took one of his little blue pills so that his whiskey wouldn't let him down. Then he added with a laugh, "You need to take care of your young, sexy wife." Then something changed. David became rough and had rough sex with her. Then they fell asleep. Stella clutched the handle of her suitcase tightly, her heart pounding as she waited for David to return home from golfing. He was due to come through the garage door any minute now. Sitting on the sofa and watching the hands of the ancient clock slowly move, Stella again repeated her prepared phrases that she had been practicing all day. She was an actress, or at least she had been, so memorizing lines was something she was familiar with. As she replayed her arguments in her head for the umpteenth time that day, she thought that she was as ready as possible. The wait was agonizing. Each click of the arrows seemed like an eternity. She just wanted to get this over with. Trying to calm down, she thought back to that night 4 days ago, to the night with Trent, when she felt calm, safe, and loved. It was hard for her to see Trent again after 18 months of separation. He looked just as she remembered him, handsome, with a boyish, slightly stupid expression on his face. The look in his intelligent blue eyes and easy smile reminded her of the brilliant and kind man she had fallen in love with and given her heart to almost 10 years ago. There was no sign of the angry, hot-tempered man he had become at the end of their relationship. Her face flushed as she remembered running her hands over his strong body as he lay on top of her, and the feel of his skin with her legs wrapped around him as he made love to her in his bed. The sound of the garage door opening startled her, and the memories of that night faded. Her heart began to pound faster when she heard the familiar loud rumble of the Lexus LX 470 pulling into the garage. When the powerful engine stopped, she sighed. It's time. The garage door swung open. David, flushed from the sun and tipsy, staggered inside. "Hello, beautiful," he greeted her, heading towards the kitchen. "Have you prepared anything today? I'm terribly hungry." She watched as her husband walked into the kitchen, dropped his wallet and keys on the counter, then grabbed a glass of water. He didn't even notice her silence in response to his question, scratching his graying hair and opening the refrigerator. She was glad that he was busy, because every second that passed gave her more time to mentally prepare for what she had to do. After last night, she knew it was necessary. Finally, she spoke. "Gave ID, I need to talk to you." She began so quietly that he didn't even look in her direction. She cleared her throat and tried again. "David, I need to talk to you." "What?" he responded, continuing to look into the refrigerator, not paying attention to her. "What's the matter?" She watched as he continued to rummage through the refrigerator, his back turned to her. This wasn't the way she wanted to do it, but she also didn't want to drag it out. Her car was already waiting for her. "David, I'm leaving you," she said quietly, still not believing the words that came out of her mouth. "Ha," he laughed, still not turning to look at her. "Good joke, Stella. You almost convinced me." She stood up from the sofa, grabbed and pulled out the handle of her suitcase. Then she repeated with bitterness in her voice, "I'm leaving you, David." He stopped rummaging in the refrigerator, closed it, and turned around. "What?" he asked, finally looking at her and seeing her with a suitcase in her hand. "Are you serious? We've been married less than 2 weeks." He grinned. "Sorry, David," she said, waiting for his comment. "I know it's a terrible time, but I don't see the point in delaying it, knowing what I already know. And I know that I don't love you. I don't want to waste any more of your time than I already have. It's my fault, not yours. I'm really sorry." Stella spent most of the day trying to perfect this answer, an answer that she hoped would be firm enough to leave no room for argument, while at the same time softening the blow for David, making him feel better about her leaving. An answer that would make it clear that it was her fault, not his. After all, it wasn't his fault. It was her fault. David slowly approached her, shaking his head as if realizing her words. His face was tense, his eyes wide open. She could see that he was boiling inside, on the verge of exploding. "We were engaged for 6 months," he said mockingly. "You couldn't understand that you didn't love me even once during our engagement." "I think I understood it and didn't understand it at the same time," she replied, sticking to her prepared answer, which was also true. "I was in a difficult position when we met, and it carried over into our engagement. I think somewhere deep down I knew that I didn't love you, but I was too depressed to realize and understand my feelings." "What the hell is this nonsense?" He got angry, continuing to approach her. I'm trying to explain. You're just a bitch, Stella, he interrupted her, his voice becoming low and threatening. Look, David, I'm sorry, she said firmly, trying to keep the conversation calm as he continued to advance on her. I left all my credit and bank cards on the counter by the coffee maker, along with my house and car keys. I don't want anything from you. That's my fault. I'll just leave and won't bother you anymore. You know, I thought it was strange that you immediately went to the shower when you came back the other day, he mused, approaching her like a lion on the hunt. I mean, what kind of woman takes a shower after a night out with her girlfriends? He asked rhetorically, with a dangerous glint in his eyes. She licked her lips as he stopped right in front of her. If he knew that she had cheated on him, she was afraid that this conversation would get out of hand. He curled his lips into a sneer, shaking his head. Who is he? He asked threateningly. Who did you sleep with that night and try to wash away the traces before you got into bed with me? No one, she answered firmly, drawing on her acting skills, even as images of her legs wrapped around Trent floated into her head and threatened to give her away. Don't you dare lie to me, he snapped, grabbing her by the throat and forcing her to take 10 steps back until her back hit the wall. The impact knocked the air out of her lungs as he continued to scream furiously. Don't you dare lie to me. There's no one, she croaked, her fingers scratching at his iron grip on her neck, which was choking her. Lying bitch, he shouted, spitting in her face. I'm not an idiot. You didn't have a penny when we met. And now you have everything you want. A new car, a huge house. But you're spending one night with your girlfriends and suddenly you want to leave? Have you found someone richer? No, she breathed, barely able to utter a word. David loosened his grip a little, allowing her to breathe, but his hand still remained tightly clenched around her neck. You lying bitch, he growled. So tell me, how much is your body worth? David, please, she begged, still fighting for every breath. Tears began to fill her eyes. Tell me, he demanded. I want to know how much your body is worth. Because I think I overpaid. She continued to try to loosen his grip on her neck. Because she didn't answer, he continued. If I offered you $500 to please me right now, would you accept? He asked. Being a few centimeters from her face, he smelled strongly of whiskey. Is this the going price for your lying mouth? He growled through clenched teeth, squeezing his neck even tighter. She closed her eyes and shook her head. She may never have loved David, but he was never cruel or violent. It was a side she had never seen and didn't expect to see tonight. I'm serious, he mocked. I'll give you $10,000. Right now. For farewell sex. What do you say? Please let me go, she sobbed, her tears running down her cheeks. Okay, $20,000, he offered. 20,000. And all you have to do is spread your long legs for me one last time. Like last night, baby. Only this time without pretense. We'll both know what it is. A prostitute who spreads her legs for money. Please let me go, she croaked, her tears running down her face. Actually, I already paid for this body, he stated, grabbing her roughly through her jeans, his other hand still on her neck. No, she screamed, scratching his arms with her nails and trying to squeeze his legs. She recoiled when she suddenly felt wet liquid hit her nose and cheek. It took a moment to realize that David had spat in her face. The shock of his action did not immediately reach her consciousness. When the reality of what had happened finally dawned on her, she burst into hysterical tears, afraid of what he might do to her next. Her tears mixed with his saliva, and the mixture slowly flowed down her cheek as she trembled in fear. David let go of her throat, and Stella collapsed to the floor. She curled up with her arms wrapped around her knees, afraid of what he might do next. Get out of my house, he growled, turning his back to her and walking away. Then he laughed. Now I can wait for you to crawl back to me. When he turned away and was at a sufficient distance, Stella quickly grabbed her suitcase, the only thing she had left of value, and ran out of the house. Going out onto the porch, she saw a black Mercedes parked on the other side of the street with a blonde behind the wheel. Stella rushed to the car as soon as the driver rolled down the window. Are you okay, Stella? the blonde asked with a Texas accent, concerned about crossing her usually pretty face. Stella opened the back door, threw the suitcase inside, then quickly sat down in the front seat of the car. "Please go," Stella said, her voice hoarse and tears blurring her vision as she buckled her seat belt. "Okay," the blonde reluctantly agreed, glancing at Stella from under her eyelashes, then changed gear and drove off. Stella turned back and, seeing the house, was grateful to be free of this place. The feeling of guilt that tormented her because she believed that she was leaving a decent man almost disappeared after David's outburst of rage. Even if he hadn't choked her or spat in her face, she knew she'd made the right decision. She didn't love him. Between her night with Trent and David's aggression the night before, she realized that marrying David was a mistake. Although her reunion with Trent was short-lived, and despite the fact that she had not seen him for a year and a half, it was enough to remember what it meant to love and be loved. It was a feeling she had never felt for David and knew she never would. Once she realized this, she realized that continuing to live with him would only prolong her unhappiness and delay the inevitable divorce. However, leaving David was only the first step in the plan that Stella had whipped up this morning. Now the hardest part was coming, she realized. She had to rebuild her life with the contents of her suitcase and a few $100s in her bank account. Only then could she understand what to do with Trent. "Here you go, honey," Haley said in her southern accent, handing Stella a glass of Sauvignon Blanc, then sat down next to her on the couch. "Now are you going to tell me why you need to sleep on my couch for weeks?" Stella didn't say a word the entire ride from David's house to Haley's apartment in Silver Lake. Haley seemed content with the silence. She didn't ask Stella any questions until they were in the apartment and handed her a glass of liquid courage. Stella took a sip of wine, then answered, "Yes, I owe you an explanation after everything you've done. I really appreciate your help. I can't express how important this is to me." "That's what friends are for," Haley answered with a smile, running a hand through her long blonde hair and tucking it behind her shoulder, holding a glass of wine in her other hand. Calling them friends was a generous exaggeration, Stella admitted. They were closer a few years ago when they met at an acting class and became partners in mischief. However, around the time Stella's relationship with Trent began to crumble, Haley's career took off. Over the past few years, this gorgeous, charismatic Texan has landed several supporting roles in film and television, and her star has been on the rise. Stella was surprised when Haley not only answered her call, but agreed to pick her up and let her sleep on her couch for a few weeks until Stella got back on her feet. "I don't deserve a friend like you," Stella admitted, putting her hand on Haley's hand and squeezing it. "I haven't been a good enough friend to you in recent years to deserve your kindness." "Stop it." Haley waved her hand flippantly, pretending to be embarrassed, although this was never true. "I wouldn't be a true Southerner if I turned you down. Plus, you know I didn't do it for free. I expect payment in the bedroom every night you're here." Stella's jaw dropped before Haley burst into laughter. "I'm kidding," she assured. Stella snorted, although as she looked into Haley's hypnotic blue eyes, the inner ring of bright blue, fading into the darker outer ring, she noticed that she was staring at her. She wondered if her stunningly beautiful blonde was actually joking. After all, as Stella knew, her newly found friend was in relationships with both men and women. "Anyway," Haley continued, bringing the conversation back on track and taking a sip of wine. "What's happening?" "I left David," Stella answered. "I already guessed about it. How you ran out of the house, your suitcase, and the fact that you need a place to stay for the night." She then added softly, "And I saw the red marks on your neck when you got into the car, and the fact that you were crying." Stella lowered her head, her face flushed with shame. "What's happened?" Haley asked softly. "I didn't love him," she answered hoarsely, taking a sip of wine to soften her throat. "As soon as I realized this, I didn't see the point in staying just for the sake of staying." "I think that makes sense," Haley agreed. "There's no point in lingering if you've already realized it." "How long were you married?" "It hasn't even been 2 weeks," Stella answered, taking another large sip of wine. Damn it, Stella, Haley exclaimed. Couldn't you have realized this a little earlier? How long were you together? A little over a year, she admitted, emptying her glass, noticing that Haley's glass was still more than half full. I should never have married him, she muttered, berating herself for her mistake. Why did you do this? Haley asked, looking closely at Stella. It's complicated, she answered weakly. I'm listening. Do you remember Trent? Of course you couldn't stop talking about him. The love of your life, that's what you called him. That guy? Yes, she answered thoughtfully. We met when we were 5 years old. He became my best friend. Then the first guy. Then the first lover. He was everything to me. I had no existence of my own without him. I didn't know who I was without him. However, in the last year that we were together, he ceased to be the person I knew. We both worked all the time to make ends meet. Whenever we had free time, I tried to get him to do something with me. Anything. But he wanted to spend that time working on the script he was writing. I understood that the script was important to him, and I tried to give him space to work, but it became an obsession. He got angry and yelled at me when I tried to do something. I remember one time when I decided to excite him by giving him a blowjob, and he yelled at me for distracting him from his work. Wow, Haley winced, taking a bottle of wine out of the refrigerator. You bet, Stella agreed, holding out her empty glass while Haley poured her more wine. In the last year, he became angry, and it seemed to me that I was the only one trying to save our relationship. Then, alone after a quarrel over money, I impulsively sent him a message. I suggested that we need some time apart. I didn't really want to break up, but I was tired of being the only one who was always trying to work on our relationship. I wanted to shake him, hoping that he would answer that he was sorry and did not want to break up. I take it he didn't do it, Haley asked. No, Stella replied bitterly, taking a sip of wine before continuing. He agreed that we needed time apart. Stella silently looked at the glass, turning it in her hands, remembering how the knife pierced her heart when she received this message from Trent. His answer broke me. I felt like I lost the love of my life that day, and I didn't just lose him. I lost myself. There was no version of me that existed without Trent. We have been inseparable since we were 5 years old. Losing him meant losing everything I had, and I didn't know how to put myself back together. After that, I was like a shell of myself, wandering around like a zombie. Days passed, then weeks, then months. In the end, David asked me out on a date. I was not interested, but I agreed because I had nothing else in my life. I also thought that the rumor that I was dating someone else would get to Trent and make him jealous. But nothing happened. On our second date, David took me to Disneyland and took a photo of the two of us, which he posted on Instagram. He tagged me in the photo. The next day, I saw that Trent had deleted all of his social media accounts, but I hadn't heard a word from him. If I had any doubts that he was still not indifferent to me, then this act dispelled them. This broke my heart again. Sorry, Haley said, patting Stella on the leg. Thank you, Stella replied, taking another sip of wine. After that, my life went on autopilot. It was as if the real me was tied up and imprisoned in the prison of my mind, forced to watch as a robot took over my body and controlled my life. I didn't feel anything. I was in a daze. The food tasted like ash. It was the opposite of that scene in The Wizard of Oz when everything goes from black and white to color. For me, all the colors of the world faded until only black and white shades remained. I should have called Trent. You should have contacted him, but I was too immature and vulnerable because he didn't fight for me. He gave up and I gave up too. When David asked me to marry him, I didn't say no. Then he treated me well and took care of me. Plus, Trent was no longer an option, and if I couldn't be with him, I didn't care what happened to me anymore. Oh, honey, Haley said sympathetically when Stella finally couldn't take it anymore. The blonde hugged her by the shoulders and pressed her to her, putting Stella's head on her shoulder, and she in return hugged her with her arm and began to sob. Everything will be fine, Haley said quietly, setting down her glass and gently stroking Stella's thick, wavy hair as she cried. Haley rocked Stella gently, letting her cry and release everything that was tormenting her heart and mind. When Stella calmed down, Haley spoke. "So, what made you change your life?" she asked, continuing to gently stroke Stella's back. Stella straightened up, wiped her tears, took a sip of wine, and answered, "Trent." Haley narrowed her eyes, not understanding the answer. "I don't quite understand." "He sent me a message a few days ago," Stella began, "congratulating me on my marriage. When I saw this message, I felt like I was shocked. My mind immediately started going through old memories and feelings. For a moment, I remembered what life was like when he and I were in love, how the world seemed so much better and full of hope. I felt alive again for a moment. I decided that I needed to see him. I needed to understand if it was me who woke up or if it was because of him. And deep down, I still loved him. We were together for almost 10 years, so although I thought I buried my feelings for him, they resurfaced when he contacted me. "Have you met?" Haley asked, her eyes lighting up with excitement. "Yes," Stella answered shyly. "And?" Haley asked, leaning forward as she waited for him to continue. "We made love," Stella answered tenderly, a faint smile appearing at the corners of her lips as she recalled that night with Trent. "Wow," Haley breathed, her eyes widening. "Are you together again?" "I don't know," Stella admitted, her face clouded with uncertainty. She took a long sip of wine before continuing. "He asked me to stay with him. I said that I couldn't and that I needed time to figure it out." "Looks like you've got it all figured out." Haley laughed, raising her glass and taking a good sip of her wine. "David," Stella thought. "Yes, with this everything became obvious. No matter what happens to Trent, I can't stay with David. But Trent, I'm not sure." "Why?" "I don't know what version of Trent I could come back with. With the man I loved with all my heart, or with someone who was evil and abandoned me. If I knew I'd get the old Trent, I'd run to him right now." "But how are you going to find out if you don't try?" Haley asked. "You're right," agreed Stella. "But this is another problem. I'm not sure I can trust my judgment at this point." "What do you mean?" "I agreed to marry David because I was vulnerable and emotionally exhausted. I don't want to make the same mistake with Trent. I need to be in a state where I can see the situation clearly. I need to be independent so I don't have to be financially or emotionally dependent on him. I need to make sure there is a Stella who is strong and independent so I don't go back to the old version of myself that couldn't survive without Trent." "That's really very wise," Haley noted, nodding and smiling. "What's next?" "I need to find a job. I have an interview tomorrow at a restaurant nearby, and I contacted my old agent this morning, so we'll be working on reminding people of my name and face again. If there's anything I can do to help you with your acting work, let me know," Haley suggested. "Would you like some more wine?" "No, thank you," Stella replied. "I already feel slightly intoxicated, and after everything that happened today, I'm ready to go to bed." "Okay, let's get you settled," Haley said, getting up from the couch. "What do you have, and what do you need?" "I don't have much," Stella admitted, lowering her eyes. "I have a toothbrush and some basic toiletries, but I think I forgot to take my pajamas." "You can take mine," Haley assured her. "We're about the same height, although you have a better figure than me." "Oh, stop it," Stella replied jokingly. "You are beautiful and slim. I would kill for this body like yours." The women laughed as they walked into Haley's bedroom. She found old flannel pajama pants and a cotton t-shirt that Stella put on after brushing her teeth and washing her face. When Stella came out of the bathroom, she saw Haley wearing a pink nightgown that showed off most of her slender, tanned legs and French manicured toes. "I put a blanket and pillow on the couch for you," Haley said. "However, I warn you, this sofa is not very comfortable. If you want to stay here, I have a king-size bed. There's plenty of room, I don't snore and I stay on my side." She laughed at the end. "I'll lie down on the sofa," Stella answered with a sigh. "I'm very grateful to you, Haley. In fact, I appreciate everything you've done for me. I can't thank you enough, and I don't want to burden you further." "Stella, it's okay," Haley said firmly. "As I already said, You are my friend. When you get tired of sleeping on this sofa, the invitation remains valid. Thank you, Haley. You are truly a wonderful friend, much better than I deserve. Good night, Stella. Good night. Stella was exhausted when she walked into Haley's apartment, kicking off her shoes at the front door and then throwing her purse on the table. It's been a long day. She hit the gym before dawn, worked the morning shift at the cafe next door, went to the audition at lunchtime, and then ended the day with the dinner shift at the Italian restaurant where she worked most evenings. As she headed towards the bedroom, all she wanted to do was put on her pajamas and go to bed. Everything to relieve fatigue from your legs. In the past 4 weeks, Stella has never worked so hard in her life. Her jobs at the cafe and restaurant were her main sources of income, and she saved every penny she had except for what she had to pay for necessary expenses, her gym membership, and the modest amount she paid Haley to cover expenses. The acting jobs came slowly as she had expected, but brought a few extras, a couple of television commercials, and one small role in a major film, although the latter was not scheduled to begin filming for several months. It took time and required a lot of energy, but she was proud of herself for being able to become independent. She brushed her teeth, washed her face, then put on the silk pajamas she'd recently bought so she wouldn't have to borrow clothes from Haley anymore. Finally, she went to bed. It took Stella 3 days to realize that Haley was right. The leather sofa, although stylish, was uncomfortable. Keeping her promise, Haley stayed on her side of the bed, didn't touch Stella, and didn't snore. Once Stella got used to sharing a bed with her, she realized that she liked it. During their time together, Haley became like a sister to Stella. The beautiful Texan was her confidant, support, and life coach when Stella felt overwhelmed and needed support. She never spoiled her, giving Stella space and freedom to be independent. But Haley was there when Stella needed it. As a result, Haley became for Stella the person with whom she knew she would go shoulder to shoulder through any fire. Stella, Haley shouted as soon as the front door opened. Are you home? Yes, Stella responded without moving from the bed. I'm in bed. It's only 10 o'clock, Haley said with a smile, walking into the bedroom. Let's go dance. I can't, Haley, Stella moaned. My legs hurt and I'm tired. I just want to sleep. As you know, Haley replied, stripping off her t-shirt and jeans, leaving her in a lacy lavender bra and matching thong. Living together in a studio apartment, this wasn't the first time Haley had stripped in front of Stella. By the way, how did the audition go? Haley looked at Stella eagerly as she unclasped her bra and let it fall to the floor, exposing her firm breasts. Stella looked down, then complained. Can we talk about this when you get changed? Haley gave Stella a wolfish grin, then put her hands on her hips and puffed out her chest. Oh, Stella, am I embarrassing you? Or do I excite you? She laughed. You're such a bitch, Stella giggled, smiling and shaking her head. Put on something. I'll take a shower first, Haley said. Hey, do you have any tampons? I've run out. No, I have. Stella froze. Are you okay, Stella? Haley asked, her smile fading, replaced by an expression of concern. You look like you saw a ghost. What date is today? Stella asked, her voice trembling. Friday. Stella jumped out of bed, ran to her purse, and pulled out her phone. Her hands shook as she opened her phone and looked at the date. She then opened her text messages, finding a conversation with Trent. She saw the date of their last text exchange. Almost a month has passed. Shit, she gasped, her hand flying up to cover her mouth as her mind plunged into panic. She'd been so overwhelmed, so busy since moving in with Haley that she hadn't noticed she was late. Everything is fine, Haley asked, standing in the bedroom doorway, her face expressing concern. I'm late, Stella whispered. Haley understood. Her face became serious. How long is the delay? About 2 weeks, Stella answered, swallowing the lump that had formed in her throat. She felt her face warming up, her skin tingling, and her head starting to spin. In a complete daze, she sat down on the sofa. We need to buy a pregnancy test to confirm this before you start worrying. But if you're pregnant, you don't have to have a baby. You don't need to give David a reason to stay in your life. This is not David's child, Stella said quietly, looking at the phone in shock at her last exchange of messages with Trent. David had a vasectomy. That's why I didn't take contraceptives. I've only been with one other man. Stella looked up and her gaze met Haley's. The compassion on Haley's face brought tears to Stella's eyes. What are you going to do? Haley asked softly. I need to take a pregnancy test, she replied, and I need to see Trent. I put off addressing my feelings for him for too long. If I wait any longer, I'll lose him again, if I haven't already. Regardless of the test result, I need to talk to him. You know I'm next to you, right? Haley asked. I know, Stella answered. You are the best friend I could ask for. You are like a sister to me. Haley quickly walked over to the couch, sat down, and hugged her. Feeling Haley's arms wrap around her, Stella felt confident that, despite all the difficulties, she would get through this. With her chin on Haley's shoulder and her lips near the blonde's ear, Stella asked softly, Can you get dressed now? Haley laughed, then opened the hug. Still, I excite you, isn't it? These must be those famous pregnancy hormones. It's not funny, Stella answered with half-serious reproach, but then she also laughed. A little funny, Haley retorted with a grin. She got up from the sofa and headed to the bedroom. Okay, I'm going to take a shower, but then I'll stay with you for the night. We have a lot to discuss, especially what to do if a bird really brought you. She laughed as she left. When Haley entered the bedroom, Stella looked at her phone again. After thinking for a moment, she typed out a text message for Trent and hit send. Can I see you? She looked at her phone, hoping Trent would see her message right away, hoping he'll answer. With every passing second, her fear that he would ignore her grew. She blamed herself for waiting so long, her confidence that he had already found someone else growing stronger with every loud beat of her heart. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she saw the ellipsis under her message, a sign that Trent is writing a response. Her heart beat faster, her palms sweated, she waited for his answer. Finally, the message arrived. Will you stay? Her heart filled with joy when she read these words. He must still want her if he's asking if she'll stay, she thought. She wasn't late. She could see no other meaning in his words. She felt tears welling up in her eyes, threatening to spill. Looking back over 2 decades of memories of her time with him, Stella remembered all the good times and how much she loved him back then. He may not have looked like a model or a movie star, but to her, he was the sexiest man alive. He treated her like gold and supported her dreams. But most importantly, he saw all sides of her, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and still loved her. She never had to pretend to be someone else around him. She could be herself, she could be imperfect, and it didn't matter. She always felt that she was enough for Trent. With those memories in her head, she immediately wrote yes, but paused before hitting send. She desperately wanted to be with him, with the man who was the love of her life. Hug him, kiss him, make love to him, have a family with him, grow old with him, and never, never let go again. This was her dream, a dream she had held for so long but lost along the way. It could become a reality, she thought, if she just pressed the send button. In a moment of hesitation, her rational mind came into play, reminding her why she hadn't contacted him sooner. She couldn't make a decision based on one night of passion and memories of a man she hadn't seen consecutively for over 2.5 years. She still wasn't sure if Trent was the man she had once fallen in love with, or the one who had let her leave so easily. Stella has worked hard in recent months to build a life independent of anyone. She was almost ready to break free of her dependence on Haley. She was worried that by rushing into a relationship with Trent, she would jeopardize her growth and be unable to become an independent person. However, she knew she couldn't afford to lose him again. She deleted her message, then thought carefully about her response. Finally, she started typing and hit send. I want to be with you more than anything in the world. But there are things I need to be sure of before I do that. We need to talk. Can we meet? I don't want to do this by text. Stella hoped she had written the right words. She hoped he wouldn't take them the wrong way and thought she was rejecting him. She didn't reject him. She needed to see him. She wanted to see him. Trent responded, "What about your husband?" Stella felt a surge of confidence. He didn't say no. Determined, she quickly wrote back, "I left him 4 days after I saw you and haven't spoken to him since. Please, Trent, I need to see you." She waited for his answer. 2 minutes passed, then 5. Her heart began to skip a beat. She wondered if she had been wrong in her assumptions. Did she attribute an intonation to his dry words that were not there simply because she wanted to hear it and not because he really meant it? She felt panic growing inside her. Then came his answer. "How about tomorrow at noon? We could have lunch." The emotional swing soared upward again, and Stella's head and heart filled with joy as she quickly typed another message. "Noon is perfect. Can we meet at your place? I'd rather talk in private. I can bring you lunch. Do you still like Italian food?" "Okay, I'll see you tomorrow at my place at noon." "Yes, I still love Italian food. If there's a Caesar salad with salmon, I'll have it. Thanks." Stella fell onto the sofa, clutching the phone to her chest. She closed her eyes and sighed. She had hope, a hope she hadn't felt in years. "Have you contacted Trent?" Haley asked, wrapping herself in one towel and drying her hair with another. "I'm meeting him tomorrow," Stella answered dreamily. "Well," Haley began, "we need to find you something for the meeting." "What should I wear?" Stella asked in a panic, suddenly realizing that the only new clothes she had bought since she started living with Haley were for work. "Don't worry, honey," Haley replied with a grin. "I'll help you. I know what you need to wear. This is not my first party." Stella closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to distract herself from the small box in her purse. As her pulse slowed and her breathing became more regular, she knocked on Trent's apartment door. Thinking that she would have a moment to prepare herself before he opened the door, she was surprised when he opened it almost immediately and invited her inside. She walked into his apartment, looking him over as she went inside. His handsome face was clean-shaven, and his short black hair was neatly styled, just like when they first met. His olive polo and beige shorts fitted him well, showing off his toned calves and wiry forearms. As an avid runner, he was fit and lean, without the extra bulk that many guys in Los Angeles had. "Hey, Stella," Trent greeted her warmly before she noticed his eyes drop and take in her outfit. "Wow," he breathed, his eyes widening, and he licked his lips. "You look amazing." Stella held back the smile that was gradually spreading across her lips, as well as the heat spreading through her body. She mentally thanked Haley again. She was wearing a white summer dress with spaghetti straps that she had borrowed from Haley. The short dress fell low, highlighting her braless cleavage, and ended just above mid-thigh, revealing her lightly tanned shoulders, arms, and legs. Brown leather cowboy boots, a gift from Haley, further accentuated her long, slender legs. With the help of her friend, she let her brown hair down, leaving two thin braids that framed her face and connected to the rest of her long, wavy hair. "Is this an old dress?" Stella asked, holding the hem of her dress and swaying her hips slightly, alternating the bends of her knees as Haley had shown her. Seeing how Trent's eyes almost popped out of their sockets and how they were glued to her legs, Stella mentally thanked her friend again. "I've never seen you in cowboy boots before," Trent finally said, his eyes meeting hers again. "They look, well, I hope you're hungry," Stella interrupted, walking past with a grin he couldn't see. "I brought you the Caesar salad with salmon that you wanted. It sounded delicious, so I got one for myself." Stella placed the food on the kitchen table, while Trent got out the cutlery and napkins. They opened the containers of food and began to have lunch. "Thanks again for lunch," Trent said, giving her that warm, slightly awkward smile that she loved to see when they were growing up together. "So, what were you doing?" he asked nervously. Although her heart was pounding, Stella carefully rehearsed this moment, determined to give the best performance of her life. A performance that would reassure Trent that she hadn't been ignoring him for the past month, and would also reassure him that he would never leave her. "Well," Stella began between bites. Like I said, I left David. I realized I couldn't stay with him a few days after I left here for the last time. She paused, letting her words sink into his mind. They both froze, stopped chewing, their eyes met, and the world stopped. Although they were silent, they both understood what had not been said. She had removed the obstacle to their reunion. Stella continued, and the world started spinning again. I live with a friend, Haley, whom I met in acting classes back when you were at the University of Southern California. I work non-stop in cafes and restaurants, and at the same time I try to find time to take up acting again. I've had a few jobs and hope to move into my own place soon once I've saved enough money. I haven't had a free moment since I last saw you, but I like feeling a little more independent, and it feels good to be chasing my dreams again. That's wonderful, Trent replied with a sincere smile and a warm look in his blue eyes. I'm really happy for you. And you? She asked, to gain time while she mentally prepared to tell him what she had come for. What were you doing? Writing, was his one-word answer before he popped a piece of salmon into his mouth. She waited until he swallowed, and then he continued, I finished the script I was working on. The one I mentioned uh, last time you were here. This is wonderful. Stella wanted to say more, but was not ready. Since she was the one who suggested talking to him, she knew that the initiative had to come from her. She cheered herself up as they silently ate the rest of their food. Okay, Trent began softly. You wanted to talk. Stella swallowed the lump in her throat, realizing that she could not put it off any longer. Her heart was beating so hard that she pulled herself together. I'm late, she said, watching as Trent froze, then put his fork down. He straightened up, his eyes glued to hers, focusing all his attention on her. Menstruation should have started 2 weeks ago. To answer a question you probably have, David had a vasectomy many years ago, and the only other man I've been with is you. So if I'm pregnant, you'll be the father. Trent stared at her, then took a deep breath. She tried to guess what he was thinking about. She had known him almost all her life, and she felt that she could recognize his hints and mannerisms, even if she had not seen him for over a year. With every breath he took, she thought she saw a familiar look in his eyes, the one he used to look at her to reassure her. To reassure her, she hoped she wasn't mistaken. So you don't know if you're pregnant yet? He asked calmly. No, I only realized last night that I was delayed. I was so busy and stressed that I didn't even think about it. She reached into her purse, took out a small box, and put it on the table. I brought a pregnancy test. I thought we could find out together. Trent's eyes never left hers as he silently took in the news she had just given him. She had more to say, and she realized that now was her chance. I thought about this all night, she began. Regardless of the test results, I want to give us another chance. She saw his eyes widen, and a smile full of joy appeared on his face. Wait, she intervened, and his smile instantly disappeared, and anxiety flashed in his eyes. I'm not ready to move in with you. I need to make sure that you are the man that I have loved most of my life, and I need to continue to work on myself to make sure that I am self-sufficient. I'd like to go slowly, like dating, where we get to know each other again before we get back into a serious relationship. I want this to be an exclusive relationship. I'm not interested in dating anyone else, but I'd like us to have our own space first. She couldn't understand his face. Whatever he thought, he kept it to himself. I'm worried, she asked nervously. What do you think? Trent nodded slowly, his eyes distant and unfocused, as if he was contemplating his answer. Her heart was pounding, and she bit the inside of her lip, waiting for him to speak and give her the answer she was hoping for. It seemed to her that the dream of a life with the man she loved, and perhaps, if the pregnancy test was correct, their child, was at her fingertips. I think that's reasonable, he replied, forcing a smile. I guess you're right. We need to go slowly. She let out a sigh of relief she hadn't realized she'd been holding, happy that he had agreed to her plan. She was so afraid that he would reject her, or deny paternity, or simply leave because she had waited too long. Now it seemed that she could get everything she dreamed of. It may take a while, but this is Trent. They will find a way. Then he continued. I agree that there is no need to rush. I remember how painful it was when you left me. Sorry, what did you say? Stella interrupted him, raising her eyebrows and staring at him. Her fears returned and were soon replaced by anger. When did I leave you? You're the one who abandoned me, Trent. Well, technically, I think we're both separated, he replied, spreading his arms to the sides as if in a sign of reconciliation. We both wrote. Whoa, 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 Stella interrupted him again, louder this time. She stood up, pushing back her chair. Do you think so for the last year or more? Why did I leave you? Well, yes, you were the first to suggest taking a break, he answered calmly, slowly getting up from his chair and approaching her. I didn't want to take a break. I only agreed because I thought you wanted it. She moved away from him, walking around the table so that he was between them, the sound of her boots echoing dully on the hardwood floor as they watched each other like predator and prey. Are you kidding me? Do you really think so? Why did I want to take a break? Trent opened his mouth to respond, but she interrupted him again. I was the only one who fought for us last year. You were too busy with your precious script, and I was the only one trying to get you to spend time with me. Trent slowly continued to follow her around the table, his arms outstretched in a conciliatory gesture. Stella, it wasn't that I didn't want to spend time with you, it was that you always offered to do things that required money. Money we didn't have. He quickly tried to grab her hand, but Stella had expected this and dodged away. The booming sounds of her quick footsteps echoed through the kitchen as she moved back to the opposite end of the table. She was annoyed, looking at him with fury. Something in her gaze probably made him stop in his pursuit, and he raised his hands, indicating that he was no longer going to catch up with her. She thought he was grinning, the scoundrel. So, it's my fault then? She demanded. Is it my fault that we broke up? No, Stella, that's not what I wanted to say. Because, as far as I remember, that blowjob that I tried to give you while you were peeing didn't cost you anything. She screamed at him. What? He asked in surprise. She raised an eyebrow, as if telling him not to try to pretend he didn't remember that day. Oh yes, exactly, I remember. You're right, he admitted softly. Of course I'm right, she replied, crossing her arms under her chest and raising them a little, hoping that he would notice. And he noticed. You left me, Trent. I only wrote that message because I wanted you to fight for me the same way I fought for you. But you. Stella, I'm sorry, Trent interrupted, moving around the table towards her again. I swear. No, forget it, Trent, Stella interrupted, walking away from him again and approaching where they were sitting at lunch. She grabbed the pregnancy test box and headed to the bathroom. Let's just get this over with. Stella closed the bathroom door behind her, ignoring what Trent was trying to tell her before the door closed, and she couldn't hear him. She couldn't believe that he really thought she was to blame for their breakup. Looking back, she could perhaps see his point. But she would never admit it to him. It didn't matter, and the fact that he even suggested it was their fault showed how little he understood her feelings. He couldn't argue with her feelings. She began to doubt whether he really was the man she knew. Does he really not see how hard I tried to keep us together? She thought. Frustrated, she tore open the packaging and pulled out a thin stick. What should I do about it? She thought, impatiently turning the wand and examining it. Somehow, it was not immediately clear how the test worked. She decided to look for instructions. Stella, Trent called from the other side of the door. Are you okay? I'm pissing on a damn stick to see if I'm going to gain extra pounds in the next 9 months, Trent, she shouted back. How do you think I feel? That silenced him. She grinned. Stella flushed the toilet, pulled up her panties, and left the bathroom. Well? Trent asked expectantly as she walked past him. Here, Stella answered calmly, handing him a pregnancy test. She stood in front of him and looked straight into his face. You'll probably want to wash your hands afterwards because I peed on it. What should I watch? Trent asked, ignoring her last comment. One line means I'm not pregnant, she replied irritably. Then she added nervously, 2 lines mean I'm pregnant. Okay, he responded. So far I see only 1 line. We need to wait a little. she explained more softly as her worries and uncertainty surged again. Stella, Trent said gently, his eyes never leaving hers. I'm sorry. She was silent, waiting for him to continue. It was my fault that we broke up, he said, although she knew that it was not so. He was right the first time. She was just as guilty as he was, and he knew it. I should have fought harder for you. I should have done more to show you how much I love you. I should never have let you leave, and I should have contacted you much earlier than I heard you got married. He said everything she wanted to hear, not because it was right. Both knew that this was not so, but he acknowledged her feelings. He was willing to admit he was wrong to show her that she was more important to him than being right. It wasn't entirely your fault, she admitted. I shouldn't have suggested breaking up. And I should have contacted you first. I didn't want to leave. Trent walked up to her, a warm smile on his face. This time, she didn't shy away from him. She stood motionless as he wrapped his arms around her and held her tightly to him. She closed her eyes and placed her hands on his back, hugging him tightly, inhaling the fresh scent of his cologne. I know you're scared, he whispered, his mouth next to her ear. He was right. Stella was scared. Even though she loved the thought of having a child with Trent, she wasn't ready to take that step. She wasn't ready to put her career and independence on hold after working so hard to get her life back on track. She would do what was necessary, but she knew she wasn't ready to be a mother yet. And until a few minutes ago, she was worried about how Trent would react to this news. She was afraid that this might push him away from her. He was a successful writer. She had no idea if he wanted to add parenthood to his list of responsibilities at this stage of his life. She took a deep breath, surrendering to Trent's warm embrace, feeling her fears ease in his strong arms. Memories of their early friendship and years of blossoming teenage love flashed through her mind. She fell in love with him because he was her rock, the man who allowed her to find herself while always offering her security when she needed it. Listening to his breathing and feeling his chest rise and fall, she felt that old feeling of comfort again and pressed herself even closer to him. When he held her like this, she thought, there was no place she'd rather be. Has it been long enough? He asked softly, rocking her in his arms. She sighed, not wanting to leave his embrace, but they needed to know, both of them. I think so, she said, releasing him. Let's look together. Her heart began to beat wildly in her chest again. Trent held out the pregnancy test, and they both looked at it. One line. I don't understand, Stella said in confusion. Tears began to well up in her eyes. The emotions she had been holding in for the past 14 hours finally broke through her mental barriers, tearing them apart like water through a cracked dam. How accurate are these tests? Trent asked carefully. I don't know, she snapped louder than she intended. Perhaps my delay is due to stress. I guess I need to see a doctor. Stella's thoughts began to spin as new fears washed over her. If she's not pregnant, will Trent really want to be with her again? She was suddenly afraid that he only said all these things because he thought they would raise a child together. If there is no child, will he still want to be with her? She was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Trent then hugged her again and whispered in her ear, be it now or in the future, I want to have a child with you. Simple words, but they erased her fears, as he had done so many times over the years that she had known him. This man, with a kind heart and a calming personality, was the one she loved, the one she so hoped was still inside him. He continued to stroke her hair and gently massage her lower back. I never stopped loving you, Stella, and I promise that I will never give you a reason to doubt my love again. I will prove everything you need and give you as much space as you need until you are ready. Whether it's today, next week, next month, or even next year, I'll be there. I promise you this. Hearing his words, she wanted to give up her plan to go slowly and move in with him immediately. It would be a mistake, she knew it. She needed to stick to her plan. However, it was only a matter of time. They were made for each other, and nothing can separate them anymore, she thought. You should be a writer, she said quietly into his chest, then raised her head and met his blue eyes, which were already looking at her with adoration. You're good with words. They smiled at each other with love, with that look that expressed all their hope that their once-lost dream could finally come true. He bowed his head slowly, paused, then continued. Sensing his intention, she raised her head to meet him and pressed her lips to his. The moment their lips connected, she felt an electric charge throughout her body, as if the world was filled with color again. The darkness that had shrouded her for the past year and a half had finally lifted. With this kiss, pure and sweet, she became his again, and he hers. She wouldn't tell him yet, but her heart belonged to him. From this day until the end of time. She took his hand, slowly leading him into the bedroom, the sound of her boots echoing through the room as she smiled shyly at him over her shoulder. She led him to the edge of the bed, then quietly but insistently said, "Don't move. I'll be right back." She entered the bathroom, closed the door, and quickly examined what the tears had done to her face. God, I look terrible, she thought, quickly wiping away the streaks and fixing what she could without makeup. Looking at herself in the mirror over the sink, she took a deep breath and prepared herself for what she was about to do. I hope you're right, Haley, she thought, remembering her friend's advice on what to do if it got to that point. Haley was right about the effect the dress and boots would have on Trent, so Stella decided to trust her on that too. She reached under her dress, took off her panties and left them on the floor, then returned to the bedroom. She walked confidently towards Trent, who was still standing where she had left him. He began to raise his arms to hug her. She quickly raised her hand to stop him. "You just stay here and do what I say for the next half hour, cowboy. You do this, and I will reward you." She shot him a mischievous smile. A satisfied and interested smile appeared on his face. His eyes became heavy and full of passion. "I'm all yours," he said. They made love, slowly and tenderly at first, then roughly and passionately. "I love you, Stella," he breathed. "I love you so much." "I love you too." She continued to lie on top of him, listening to the soft sounds of their breathing together and feeling his heart beating through his chest and echoing on her own. Stella rolled off several sheets of toilet paper to clean herself. After the first wipe, she folded the paper and noticed it. Scarlet, she started her period. "Hey, cowboy," she called from the bathroom. "Guess what? I'm entering my apartment now. Come." Stella texted Trent as she entered the apartment she still shared with Haley. Although Stella had saved enough money to move out and rent her own place, Haley convinced her to stay. They would both save money by living together, Haley argued. More importantly, Stella had become very close to the feisty Southerner over the past month and a half, so much so that she would actually miss her friend if she moved into her own apartment. They agreed to live together until Stella was ready to move in with Trent, which both women considered a matter of the immediate future. Stella took off her sandals and left them by the front door. She was tempted to change out of the pastel yellow tube dress she'd worn to the audition, but decided to wait for Trent. He might enjoy taking this dress off of her, she thought, especially if she wore cowboy boots. He'd really grown to love those boots over the past 2 weeks, especially since she started taking birth control. In the kitchen, while drinking a glass of water, Stella heard a knock on the door. She was surprised that Trent came so quickly. It had only been about 5 minutes since she sent him the message. They both lived in Silver Lake, so he was close by, but it usually took him longer to get there. "Hey, cowboy," she said in a seductive tone as she opened the door. "Cowboy, huh?" David said, raising his eyebrows at her. Stella instantly tensed. It wasn't Trent. It was David, her future ex-husband. "David," she breathed nervously, "what are you doing here? And how do you know where I live?" The words came out instinctively, without thinking. As her mind caught up with her mouth, she began to close the door. "Wait, Stella," David said repentantly, placing his hand on the door, preventing it from closing. "Can we talk? I promise, I just want to talk." Stella stared at him, her heart pounding, her body frozen. Memories of their last meeting flashed through her mind, his hand on her neck and the sour smell of whiskey from his mouth. Her intuition told her to slam the door, but she was in shock, still processing why and how he got there, unable to move or act. I want to talk about the divorce petition you filed, he began softly. I may have a solution that will save both of us a lot of time and money. Please just listen to me. Stella filed for divorce a few weeks ago, and David fought it as hard as he could, considering they got married in a state where no-fault divorce is the norm. She wanted an annulment, but her lawyer advised her that the grounds for annulment were extremely limited, and none of them seemed to apply to Stella's case, so she filed for divorce. She hoped the application would be simple since she was not claiming marital property or alimony. She just wanted freedom so that when she and Trent were ready, they could take the step, and for David to pay for her lawyer since he had so much more money than she did. Paying for Stella's lawyer was a complicated issue. Since they had been married less than 2 weeks and she was young and able to earn money, there was a possibility that she would have to pay for her lawyer if the case dragged on, especially if David continued to challenge it, asking for counseling or other alternative measures that were simply dragging out the process. Although her financial situation had improved, the lawyer was expensive, and she refused to take money from Trent to pay for her mistake. Tempted by the possibility that David would stop fighting the divorce, Stella reluctantly agreed to talk to him. Okay, she said. Tell me about the solution. Can I come in? He asked, waiting and slightly wounded. She reluctantly let him inside. However, the man standing at the door seemed to be the same decent David she had agreed to marry, and not the drunken, wild-eyed one she had last seen. Okay, she agreed. Let's sit at the table. Stella waited until David sat down, then poured 2 glasses of water and brought them to the table. Turning to him, she noticed that he was looking at her bare legs from behind. Seeing that his face remained calm and not filled with lust, she relaxed a little. However, she chose the chair at the table that was furthest away from him. So, what's your solution? Stella asked, getting straight to the point. The sooner he says his thing, the sooner he will leave. I know that you are asking the court to order me to pay for your lawyer in your divorce petition. However, I am sure that your lawyer told you that there is a possibility that you will have to pay for her services yourself rather than me. He began, speaking slowly, his voice calm. Her lawyer warned her about this possibility. However, Stella did not show it. There is also the possibility that you will have to pay for my services, especially given the short duration of our marriage, your age and ability to earn a living. I'm sure your lawyer mentioned it too. She mentioned. However, her lawyer considered this outcome extremely unlikely, and the chances of David paying Stella's lawyer were higher than the chances of her paying his lawyer. What kind of proposal? Stella asked coldly. Of course, he replied slowly, clearly surprised by the abruptness of her answer. Instead of you spending all this money on your lawyer, what if I agreed to stop fighting the divorce and paid you an extra $20,000? How do you like this proposal? I think there's a catch here, she replied, raising her eyebrows, annoyed that he was trying to deceive her. There will be one condition, he agreed, his voice remaining calm. And what is this condition? She asked, afraid that she knew the answer. I want you, he said. Last time. I'm not a corrupt bitch, David, she snapped, angry that he was bringing it up again. I'm not going to sleep with you for money. We already discussed this, remember? Besides, it's beneath your dignity. You are successful and attractive, and you have plenty of other opportunities. Perhaps, but none of them compare to you, Stella, he countered. Even though you may not have felt the same, I truly loved you. Look, I'm offering you freedom and a significant payout for what you've already given me before. Can't you at least think about it? No. Haven't I been good to you? He asked pleadingly. I loved you. I treated you well. I bought everything you wanted. Please think about it. I don't owe you anything, David, she countered, remembering how the last few meetings had been less than loving. I think we're done. She stood up, waiting for him to do the same. Okay, he said, slowly getting up. I'll leave. As he turned and walked towards the door, Stella came out from behind the table and followed him to see him out. Upon reaching the door, David turned and said, Thank you for your time, Stella. It's a pity that we couldn't agree. I really loved you. Maybe when this is all over, we can be friends." He extended his hand, inviting her to shake. Hoping that this would make him go away, she took his hand and shook it. "Trent got lucky," David said before the calm expression disappeared, replaced by a gloating grin. Stella didn't have time to realize how David knew Trent's name or the change in his behavior before her world turned upside down. The air rushed out of her lungs before the blow to her stomach registered in her brain. The blow was not strong, but fast, delivered under the ribs into the diaphragm. Stella bent over, her legs wobbled, she tried to breathe. Struggling for air, she was barely aware of David twisting her hand, which he still held, behind her back, removing the belt with his other hand. She wanted to scream, but still unable to breathe, she could only wheeze and moan. She felt the belt tighten tightly around her wrists, which were now behind her back. Her consciousness, now catching up with what was happening, turned on panic mode. She tried to concentrate. She could almost breathe, which meant she would be able to scream. She only needed a few seconds. Horror filled her as she felt the fabric pressed between her lips. Gag. He shut her mouth. In her mind, she was screaming for help. However, only a muffled moan escaped from her mouth. She felt him grab her bound wrists and push her forward, guiding her towards the back of the sofa in the apartment. When she reached the sofa, he turned her around to face him. He spread her legs with his knee, then pressed his body against her legs, pinning them to the sofa. "You should have taken the money, Stella," he mocked, his face inches from hers. He leaned back, grinning, his demonic eyes hungrily gazing at her cleavage as she tried and failed to scream for help. "I marked you as mine, remember? Did you really think you could just walk away from me and humiliate me without consequences?" Tears streamed down her face as the realization of the horrific reality washed over her. David was going to have sex with her. She screamed again, hoping and praying that someone would hear her muffled screams. "No one will hear you scream," he laughed. "Your breasts are perfect," he purred, looking at her bare breasts. While his gaze was down, he didn't notice how she threw her head back before slamming her forehead sharply into his nose. She felt it crack. "Damn bitch," he roared, staggering back and clutching his nose. Stella blinked, suppressing her own pain to focus, and rushed to the front door. With her hands tied behind her back, she had to turn around to reach the doorknob. Turning back towards the room, she was able to open the lock before her hopes were dashed. David had already recovered and was on top of her in a matter of seconds. "You're not going anywhere," he growled. She was overcome with pure horror as the realization of what was happening completely overwhelmed her. She was naked and defenseless, and she had no way to stop him. She began to kick furiously, but to no avail. "What the hell?" A voice came from behind her. It wasn't just any voice. It was Trent. Her heart filled with hope. He came for her. Stella heard Trent's footsteps, louder with each step, until he ran towards her. At the same time, she felt David let go of her hands and step away from her. Freeing herself from his grip, she turned around and saw Trent pounce on David, knocking him to the ground. The sound with which David landed on the floor and knocked all the air out of his lungs was unmistakable. 2 quick blows to the face and David was down. Hearing David moan on the floor and seeing him with his pants around his ankles, the hope Stella had felt when Trent arrived was replaced by the rage that had built up during the attack. She screamed furiously into the gag, then stomped hard on David's groin, putting all her fury and power into the blow. The high-pitched squeal that came from his chest was unlike anything she had ever heard. It was an inhuman sound, almost animalistic. "Stella," Trent said firmly, trying to get her to look him in the eyes. "Stella, it's over." His words reached her. It was all over. She turned to him, looking into his beautiful blue eyes. The eyes of the man who saved her. When she saw the love reflected in those wonderful blue circles, she burst into tears. Trent gently untied her gag as she cried on his chest. His hands were gentle as he removed the gag, then carefully brushed the hair away from her face. Her body trembled uncontrollably as he unbuckled the belt behind her. When her arms were free, she wrapped her arms around him and held him tightly to her, sobbing, filling the room with the sounds of her sobs. The horror she felt during the attack seemed to flow out of her, carried away by a river of tears. He held her while she cried, his embrace giving her the feeling of security she needed at that moment. She was safe, safe from the attacker, safe to be weak and vulnerable. Hearing David groan, Trent let go of her and looked at the monster. "We need to tie him up and call the police," he said softly. Stella nodded and Trent gently pulled her dress up to cover her breasts. He kissed her forehead tenderly, then took David's belt and tied his hands behind his back. Once the animal was subdued, Trent called the police. "I'm ready to live my life," Stella thought, looking at her reflection in the mirror. "I can't live in fear or be a victim forever." For the past month, ever since David attacked her at Haley's apartment, she had been living on the edge. The first 2 weeks were the hardest. She was afraid to go out anywhere and was suspicious of any man who walked too close or looked at her for more than a second. Her heart began to pound wildly, and her anxiety went through the roof as soon as she heard a knock on the door or the sound of lightning. Over the past 2 weeks, as her therapist's words began to sink in and time passed, her anxiety began to lessen. Although her case was traumatic and left emotional scars that could take years to heal, she also knew she was lucky. If she hadn't texted Trent asking him to come over or opened the front door when she tried to escape, things could have ended much worse. After the attack, she immediately moved in with Trent. His presence brought her the comfort and sense of security she needed in her recovery. She only felt safe when he was around, and since he worked from home, he was with her most of the time. Trent had been wonderful while she was recovering from the attack. Patient, loving, attentive, and gentle. He gave her the space she needed to heal, but also always seemed to sense when she needed his support. When she had to go back to work or an audition, he was there for her every second he could. He drove her to and from work and found a place nearby to work on his laptop while she worked. When she finished, she always saw him waiting for her with a satisfied and reassuring smile. When they were alone in his apartment, Trent would share with her what he had written that day. She loved reading his scripts and stories. They were so emotional and powerful, and it brought her back to their time together when he was still a student, allowing her to reconnect with the version of herself that she loved. Discussing Trent's work also helped rekindle the friendship they had developed over nearly 2 decades. She enjoyed sharing her thoughts and opinions on his stories, their conversations usually lasting late into the night, often reminding them both of what attracted them to each other in the first place. But now, unlike in the past, Trent listened to her carefully and valued her opinions, implementing most of her advice. Over time, he began to affectionately call her his muse. She liked it when he called her that. Any doubt Stella had that Trent might not be the man she fell in love with slowly evaporated with each day she spent with him. The man was still inside him. But there was something else, a wisdom and maturity that made him stronger and that she found even more attractive and comforting. However, their sex life, which was burning like a white flame before the incident with David, completely stopped. After the horror he experienced, the thought of sex made him nauseated. To Trent's credit, he never pushed, giving her the space she needed to move forward at her own pace. With her mental state improving over the past 2 weeks and her love for Trent growing stronger every day, Stella wanted to let her guard down with him. She wanted to give herself completely to him and accept him fully in return. It might take months or years to heal from the attack, but she couldn't wait that long. Whatever her path forward was, she knew she wanted to walk it with him. She put on her brown leather cowboy boots, put on her brown Stetson hat, and walked out of the bathroom naked. She assured herself that she could do it. "Hey, cowboy," she called hesitantly to Trent, who was clearing away the dishes from the dinner he had prepared for them. "Can you help me with something here?" "I'll come now," he responded. A moment later, he walked into the bedroom, his eyes widening as he saw her standing naked in front of the bed with her hands on her hips, wearing only cowboy boots and a hat. She walked towards him, trying to look confident, while Trent glared at her. Her hands shook as she reached for the button on his shorts, her eyes downcast as she watched her tentative fingers awkwardly try to unbutton his shorts. I'll take good care of you, she said, trying to sound seductive. After a moment, she unzipped his shorts and carefully reached for his zipper. You took such good care of me. Stella, he said quietly. She gulped as she began to unzip the zipper, the sound still making her uneasy. Her heart began to beat faster, but she continued, determined to show him how much she loved him and wanted to be with him. Stella, he said again. Stella, he said softly again. Get up, please. He tugged her hand lightly, encouraging her to stand up. She stood up, unable to meet his eyes as she felt tears welling up in her eyes. She thought she could do it. She wanted to do this for him. She felt him lift her hat slightly to look into her face. However, her eyes were glued to his chest, afraid to look up and see the disappointment she thought she would see there. He gently grabbed her chin, lifting it up until she met his eyes. Looking into those gorgeous blue eyes, she saw only love and compassion. He wasn't disappointed in her, and she should have known he wouldn't be. Not after all he had done to prove his love. Tell me what you're thinking, he suggested. I just wanted to show you how much I love you. I was afraid that I had been a disappointment to you lately. Why did you think you disappointed me? Because I am broken goods, she said, sobbing. I told you that I would not get into a relationship with you again until I was sure that you were the person I fell in love with. But look at me. I'm not the girl you fell in love with. I wanted to show you that I can be that girl again. If I can't be that person again, then I'm afraid you won't want to be with me anymore. Stella, he said, stroking her cheek and giving her a warm smile. I love you more now than ever before. I admire your commitment to your career and desire to support yourself. I fell in love again with that girl who stays with me late and loves to discuss the stories I write, and I'm so impressed by your strength in overcoming trauma that could have broken you. You may not be exactly the girl I fell in love with, but you are the woman I love now. His words inspired her heart. It was as if he had read her mind, or more likely, he just knew her so well because he had been there for almost every important stage of her life. That's exactly how I feel, she admitted, reaching out and gently touching his smooth, handsome face. If you're not ready to have sex, we can wait, he assured her. I will wait for you as long as necessary. You're worth the wait. But I want to try, she replied. I feel like I'm ready, Can I suggest something? He interrupted her. Certainly. Maybe we should start with something simple, he said. Let's just focus on you and me and leave the accessories. He took off her hat and tossed it to the side for another time. There will still be plenty of time for wild, funny, sexy, and spicy moments. This time, let's focus on us. Listening to his words, her heart fluttered, and she felt excited again for the first time in a month. I would love that, she replied with a smile so wide that she could feel the tension in her lips. They finished undressing. He then took her hand and led her to the edge of their bed. I want to feel you, she whispered brokenly. Lying next to Trent and enjoying the aftertaste, Stella reflected on their path. She thought she knew what love was from their first time before they broke up. She was wrong. Their struggle to find each other again, the mistakes they made along the way, and the realization of what they almost lost created something new. Their love passed through the fire, and like molten metal in a crucible, it came out purified and stronger. Holding him in her arms, resting her head on his chest, she knew she had found her home, because home was where he was. Trent, she asked, running her fingers through his chest hair. Yes, he responded. Do you remember when I texted you that I might be pregnant? Of course I remember, he replied. Do you remember what you answered me then? Yes, he said slowly, not sure where she was going with this. Ask me again, she said, propping herself up on her elbow to look him in the face. He tilted his head, meeting her gaze. His blue eyes met her chameleon blue-gray eyes, which at that moment seemed a deep blue. Will you stay? He asked, with a smile on his lips. I will stay with you forever, she replied, propping herself up on her elbow to kiss him tenderly. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.